put these in your World War II notes. The Manhattan Project is essentially it's the code name for the secret project to develop atomic weapons, which are first used at the very end of World War II. All right. So Albert Einstein, how does he fit into this story? Most people have heard of Einstein before. Very famous scientist. Einstein was actually of German descent. He was born in Germany before the Nazis were in power, and he was a Jew. So you know how things are going for the Jews over there. Throughout World War II in the lead up to it. Anyway, he ends up coming to the United States in 1932. Uh, for a variety of reasons, but he was a famous scientist by that point. He had already released his like theory of relativity. So he's known around the world in like scientific circles and stuff, and he comes over here to do a speaking tour. While he's over here, then in 1930 was when Hitler and the Nazis first started to gain power. They didn't have power locked down in Germany, but that was when the German economy had tanked and they had started to consolidate power. And in 1932, they gain a little more power, and by 1934, that's when Hitler is like firmly in control. So this is kind of in the middle, the early years of Hitler's rise to power. Well, Einstein is a smart guy. He's not just smart at like high level physics and stuff. He's also, I think, from what I know of him, a pretty witty, common sense, smart dude that's savvy and gets politics and what's going on in the world too. Well, while he's over, he knows that the Nazis are no fans of Jews. He obviously knows he's a Jew. He's kind of worried that, and it's disconcerting that these guys are coming to power and they don't really care about his credentials or anything. All they see is that he is a Jew and the Jews are evil and they're trying to take over the world, and that fits into all of their paranoia and conspiracies. So while he is over here in America on a speaking tour, he actually gets word that the Nazis have seized some of his property, one of his homes, taken some of his possessions, I think his bank accounts. That freaks him out. And he realizes that, man, if I go back over to Nazi Germany, it's likely I'm going to be a goner. Now they don't have like gas chambers and the death camps going yet, but like Hitler around this time is when he opens up Dachau, that camp that you saw our guys from the 101st Airborne liberate. That was the very first concentration camp to open up, and it's probably pretty likely that if Einstein had gone back over there, eventually he was going to get put into Dachau, and I'm sure it would have been a horrible and tragic end to his story in some way, shape, or form. So he understands that, he gets it, and he doesn't want to go back over there and throw his life away. So he asks the American government, says, "Hey, can I stay here, guys? I don't really want to go back to Nazi Germany for obvious reasons." Now, America was not accepting a lot of immigrants from all over the world at this time. Remember, the Depression's going on. The American economy is not good. We're not really like in a pro-immigration moment of our history at that time. However, for a guy like Einstein, I think we were willing to make an exception. He's an internationally renowned scientist and physicist. So we do accept him. We give him permanent status. He gets his citizenship, and he's going to move over here and live in America for the rest of his life. Now, when he is over here for a few years through the 1930s, he's working at some universities, still speaking, still working essentially as a scientist. But by 1939, when things really heat up over in Europe and the war is about to break out, this actually happens right before Germany invades Poland and World War II officially begins. Einstein realizes the Nazis are like pure evil. He knows Hitler is a bad dude that will do anything he can to get the most powerful army and the best weapons that he can use out on the battlefield. Einstein also knows that Germany has a lot of the best scientists in the world. A lot of his former colleagues, guys he's worked with, are over there. And obviously now, whether they want to or not, they're working for Hitler and they're doing Hitler's bidding, and probably developing weapons for him. Now, Your average person, most politicians would have no idea what an atomic, bomb is. This theoretical super bomb. They don't understand nuclear fission reactions. Most people are dummies like me, just normal people that go through their day to day life and they don't understand super high end chemistry and physics. But Einstein does, and while he doesn't necessarily know how to make an atomic bomb himself, nobody does. Even the high end scientists don't. He's pretty sure that the top end German scientists are developing this. And he's right. Hitler was trying to develop atomic weapons. That's a part of the war I didn't really cover because we're able to sabotage that effort. And the Nazis, thankfully, are never able to develop atomic weapons. But think about how history could be totally different if the Nazis had developed an atomic weapon before everybody else. Even if the Americans and the Soviets outnumbered them and had more factories, it might not have mattered if they were able to start churning out atomic weapons and nuking cities, right? That could have been literally a game changer, and the world might look totally different today. Well, anyway, Albert Einstein sends a letter to FDR, our president, Franklin Roosevelt, and he warns him of this and says, "Hey, you better watch it. We better get on the stick here." Even though America wasn't even close to getting into the war yet, this is several years before Pearl Harbor. FDR is concerned about the Nazis, and he thinks that it's likely we will come into conflict with them at some point in the future. So FDR starts the Manhattan Project, it's called. Manhattan is the island right in the center of New York City. Now, why this project to develop atomic weapons gets called the Manhattan Project, I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, but that was just kind of like the code name for this project to develop atomic bombs. So make sure you have that. Manhattan Project, you'd want to know it's the top secret project to develop atomic bombs. And I'd want you to know that Albert Einstein really kind of got the ball rolling on this. I'm sure the president gets all kinds of letters. He's the president. He's the top politician in America. Probably the vast, vast majority of those he doesn't read and he doesn't really look into. But when you have one coming in from this guy, from Albert Einstein, who, is kind of almost like a household name at that point, and probably at that time the most famous scientist in the world, that's a letter, even if you're the president, you're probably going to read and take seriously. So we get the ball rolling on atomic weapons. Now, the the whole war plays out in Europe. We've already covered the end of that, where Hitler commits suicide. The Nazi regime had crumbled. You have VE Day, victory in Europe, in May of 1945. So the war is wrapped up there. That means, but the war is still raging on in the Pacific. So now we have to redeploy all of our troops. Like probably both of my grandpas, had the war drug on longer, would have seen action and fought in combat out in the Pacific to defeat Japan too. At this point, we're certain we're going to defeat Japan. That's not even like really debatable at this point. Even Japan knows they've lost the war, but it's like, how is it going to play out? How long is it going to take? And for sure the Japanese are going to lose their empire. We've already, if you follow my cursor here, we've already been island hopping across the Pacific. Like way out here is Hawaii. We're getting in close to Japan. Iwo Jima's like right here. Okinawa's right there. We're right on their doorstep. We're taking Japanese territory. But the thing is, the Japanese are way different from the Germans. They are fierce and they don't surrender. They fight to the death. They were preparing even their civilian population to fight back. And I'm talking like women and children. It was going to be all hands on deck, and we are all fighting to repel these barbarian American invaders. Okay. They're not like the Germans, where the Germans put on, they did surrender once things were hopeless and they could see the Nazis were on the way out. The Japanese, they're an honor culture. And remember, they've been a country for over 2,000 years, and they've lost wars before. They know they're losing this war, but they've never once in history been conquered by an outside power. And foreign invaders have never come in and taken control of their main islands. And from their perspective, they know that they've lost the war, their empire's crumbled, but there's no way in hell we're going to let these guys come in, these Americans, and take over our islands. Now, because they don't surrender, that simple aspect of World War II, it was estimated that if we invaded Japan the old fashioned way, the conventional, traditional way, kind of like the fighting had gone in Europe, that because of that different mentality, the casualties would have been way higher for us invading Japan. projected that about 1 million Allied soldiers would die if we invaded Japan the old-fashioned way. That's a pretty key stat I want you to have. Now, to put that in perspective for you, because that's just a big number I'm throwing at you, and you think, man, millions of people have died anyway. What's 1 more million? Well, yes, many millions of people have died in World War II, but not millions of Americans. At the end of the war, if you go look it up on Wikipedia or whatever, 450,000 Americans died during World War II. So think if the war had played out differently and we had not used atomic bombs to wrap things up more rapidly out there, the casualty rates for America could have like doubled, tripled, or more potentially. So instead of losing 450,000 Americans, we might have been closer to like 1.5 million. A lot of us might not be here today, but if both of my grandpas would have gone over and seen combat in the Pacific Theater, maybe they wouldn't have come home and I wouldn't be here. Maybe a lot of you wouldn't be here. So that could have radically changed history. Now, the Soviets agreed to help us. Remember at the Yalta conference, they said, hey, we'll come help you out. It's going to, from the time the fighting ends in Europe and the Nazis are defeated, we need about 1 year to redeploy and remobilize our troops and send them across Asia. And like, here's the Soviet Union, but they have to move their whole army, the Red Army, across the continent. And then they were going to help and invade Japan too. The thing is, Stalin never offers help without strings attached. So, if the Russians would have helped us and we had just kind of paused things and waited for them to show up too, okay, those 1 million casualties, then we could say maybe half of them would have been Russian. So that cuts it down where maybe we're only losing 500,000 guys or so, which is still a lot. But if Stalin helps us out, which, by the way, he doesn't care about his soldiers. Up to this point in the war, Russia's lost like 9, 10, maybe even more than 10 million soldiers. Actually, I think I'm citing that wrong. I think they were up to about 12 million soldiers had died. So their casualty rates are through the roof. They've lost by far more than any country fighting in the war. So for Stalin, who is a heartless, ruthless dictator that arguably is maybe even a more rotten dude than Hitler, which that's really saying something. Stalin, he wouldn't blink an eye at losing another million of his soldiers. All he cares about is getting more power and becoming a bigger, more influential country and dictator himself. So the thing is, yeah, he would have definitely helped us out and invaded Japan, but then he's going to want to split that territory with us. We weren't too keen on the idea of dividing more territory up with the Soviets because, yeah, we're working with them through World War II, but we already know they're pretty rotten dudes too. At least Stalin, their leadership is. So like how Germany was divided into two halves, East and West Germany, and the East part is going to be kind of the Russian part of Germany, and the West part is going to be like the more American or, like the democratic side of Germany. A similar thing would have likely happened in Japan had the Russians helped us, except it probably wouldn't have been East and West because Japan's a long, skinny chain of islands. It probably would have been North and South. North Japan would have been like the communist Russian part, and South Japan would have ended up being the American or democratic part. Now, as all this is kind of playing out and the war is wrapping up in Europe, several weeks before Hitler dies and the official surrender of the Nazis, FDR ends up dying too, our president. FDR had been president longer than anybody before or since. He's been president for 4 terms. He dies early in his 4th term. Now he had been in poor health for a while. Remember, he was crippled. He's the only American president we've ever had that was in a wheelchair, but that was due to polio when he was a younger man. So he has kind of a sedentary lifestyle through no fault of his own, just because he was paralyzed. But on top of that, he also drinks very heavily. They said, I think on average, about 13 martinis a day, which is like shots of vodka. He also smokes 1 or 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Well, all of that caught up with him. And eventually he has an aneurysm where a blood vessel bursts in his brain and he dies kind of unexpectedly. So maybe not so unexpectedly for his doctors or the people that knew him really well. They knew he was in poor health, but for the American public, they had no idea he was in a wheelchair and they had no idea he was in poor health. So America is shocked. This guy that has been president for, most of people's memory, now he's a goner. And the thing was, the guy that replaces him, and here's a photo of the two of them there. There's FDR. This is Harry Truman, his vice president. Harry Truman has not been vice president for 13 years for all of that time. Actually, and I forget the guy's name, but FDR had a different guy as his vice president, his right hand man, for his first three terms in office, the first 12 years. Well, then, I forget the details of this, but a political scandal plays out, and that guy has to resign. He's a goner, he's out of there. And FDR has to pick a new guy to be his running mate in that fourth election cycle, the last time he gets elected, and he didn't pick like his best friend or his right hand man. Politicians generally don't do that. You want to pick somebody that's going to balance the ticket and help get you more votes and ensure you'll get elected. So he picked Harry Truman, who is a relatively unknown senator from Missouri, just because he could give a good speech and he was popular with a lot of the middle of the country, and it was seen as a good political move. Poor Harry Truman. Now he's been vice president for about a year. FDR has not included him in on a lot of the planning. He has no idea atomic bombs exist or what that is. And now he's thrust into the role of being commander in chief, and he's going to have to wrap up and bring this whole war to an end. So imagine being hit in his shoes. FDR was a steady hand at the helm for many years through the Depression and most of World War II. But then he's a goner, and this new guy who's kind of untested, he's going to have to wrap it all up. Okay, we'll be back at you with part two real soon, and that'll kind of close everything up and tie up all our loose ends for World War II.